Hello there, scholars. I'm very excited to talk about the artist we're learning about this week. He's one of my favorite sculptors. He's an artist whose name is Andy Goldsworthy. And one of the things that makes Andy Goldsworthy's work very, very unique is that he primarily works outside. Now, with the weather getting a little bit nicer now that we're in the month of May, I'm hoping some of you will be able to get outside to collect some of the materials for this project. If not, don't worry about it. There are some things you can do the same type of sculpture. It's called a found object sculpture right inside of your house. So let's take a look at some of Andy Goldsworthy's work and find out what makes him so different and so unique. So here we can see a sculpture by Andy Goldsworthy. Now, usually when we think of sculptures, we think of using clay or wood or metal or sometimes even stone to carve things or to model them. That means build them up with that clay. But what Andy Goldsworthy does is he does something called a found object sculpture. And this is actually a real tree that was growing in the woods, surrounded by leaves on the ground. This looks like something he did in the fall. And Andy Goldsworthy collected all of these really brightly colored orange and yellow leaves. Now, these leaves originally were scattered all over the forest, and Andy Goldsworthy would walk around with a bag or a box, and he would collect the ones that held those colors he was looking for, those really, really bright oranges and yellows, and some of them even look kind of white. And then he arranged them around the bottom of the tree, right around those roots as they dig into the ground. And because those really, really bright, vibrant yellows and whites are touching the dark brown and dark green of the tree trunk, it gives it this really interesting look. It almost makes it look like the tree is glowing along the edges where it grows down into the ground. Now, one of the cool things about this is not only did Andy Goldsworthy just go into the woods and use things that he found on the ground to make his artwork, but also that when he was done, because these were objects that were already in the woods, things like leaves and sticks and rocks, he would just leave them there. He would take a photograph, and that's how he recorded his work, and then he would walk away. Now, this sculpture was made actually many years ago. These leaves were put around the roots of this tree a long time ago, so it's not there anymore. He just left it out in the woods, and eventually the wind and the rain and the snow, maybe even animals, would move those leaves. So the only real record of his work, the only way we knew that this existed, is because he took a photograph of it before he left the forest. So this is one example of his work, and I have a few more for you. Here's another sculpture by Andy Goldsworthy, and you can see all these different types of leaves and the types of colors and shapes that he found and then rearranged on the ground to make this really, really excellent pattern, this big spiraling circle pattern down on the ground using all those different leaves of different colors. But leaves aren't the only way to do this. Andy Goldsworthy also liked to work with rocks. Here's a sculpture that he created just by placing some rocks on the sand. He placed the darker rocks that he found, those black and dark gray rocks around the outside, and as he stacked them, getting closer and closer to the center here, the rocks actually began to get lighter and lighter, so that those rocks closest to the inside are very, very white. And then he filled the inside of that hole with this very, very dark, this blackish sand. And because the white, bright rocks are right next to that dark black sand, it almost looks like a hole going down into the earth. And again, this is something that he would just leave there and allow nature to kind of take that sculpture back over the course of the next days and weeks. Another really excellent sculpture of his is this one over here, where he actually found cracks, natural cracks in the rocks and in the stone, kind of like the cracks we see in a sidewalk. And he filled them up with these colorful leaves so that as someone's walking through the woods, they might find these little rainbow patches of leaves kind of settled into the wet cracks in between those rocks. Now, all of these sculptures work really, really well for Andy Goldsworthy because he built them using the same principles, the elements and principles of design, they're called. And these are mostly based on the colors, shapes, and the way he arranged them into patterns. So it would be really easy for any of us to go outside, maybe poke around your backyard, or if you're taking a walk around your neighborhood, keep your eye out for sticks or colorful leaves or maybe even flower petals And the way that you arrange them can actually create some really wonderful, natural, temporary art that you can leave outside. Now, many of us don't have access to a forest, or you might not have a park or a playground, or maybe not any green spaces near you, depending on which part of Albany or Schenectady or Troy you live in. But Andy Goldsworthy also created some sculptures that were very similar to this in some urban environments. These are two sculptures that he created in downtown New York City, right in Manhattan. In this first one, you can see he just took a wet sponge and made this long squiggly line all the way down the sidewalk. And he did it at a time of day when he knew the lights of the buildings would reflect that light all the way down the sidewalk. It almost looks like a river seen from far, far away. Now that wet streak wouldn't last for very long. He just made it with a sponge, took a photograph, and then walked away. And probably after a few minutes, it dried up. So it's a very temporary sculpture. It's not something that's going to stay there for a long time. Over here on this side, we can see he used that same idea of finding some colored leaves, but this time he wove them into a chain link fence next to a tennis court at his local park. And because of the way he tore the leaves before he wove them in there, it leaves this impression, this circle shape. It almost looks like a sun or a sunflower made out of leaves right there on a fence on the edge of a park. So it doesn't matter where you live. If you live in an area that maybe has some trees or grass or a park nearby, or if you live maybe further downtown in Albany or Schenectady or Troy, you can still create temporary sculptures outside and leave them up. People might see them, but the most important thing for you to do is to take a photograph of it, because after you leave it there, it might last for seconds, it might last for minutes, it might last for hours or days, but come back in a couple of weeks and you'll probably find it's not there anymore at all. Now, here are some student samples that I've collected both off the internet or from students I've done this with before. And it can range from anything as simple as rocks in a spiral pattern in some grass. And notice these rocks do have a pattern, not only that spiral shape that they create, but they start out large and they get smaller as they go down. That's a really neat trick to use if you're building one of these temporary sculptures. Another thing you could do is stack them up in a vertical arrangement. These rocks are stacked on top of each other, and then they have pine cones on top of them, and then a little nest of leaves around the outside edge and in the middle. This one was made, it looks like on a piece of sidewalk with bits of grass and leaves and sticks that might have just been found in their front yard or maybe on a walk around the neighborhood. You can see these stepping stones have a less abstract picture on each one of them, just made by collecting little rocks that were here along the edge of the house. I see a little smiley face and a heart and a peace sign. That would be an excellent way to make a sculpture if you have access to small stones and maybe some flat pieces of sidewalk. One of the things I want to talk about, and I really like this one over here that takes these green leaves and yellow leaves and then orange leaves and red leaves and makes this rainbow shape, is that this artist was really careful to keep their sculpture over here on the side, not directly on the steps. That would be really dangerous for people to walk on. You don't want to build a sculpture where people might be walking through, but this is on the other side of the stairs behind this little wall. So we know it's in a safe place. And since these are natural objects, it's okay to leave that there because those are things that would be found out in nature anyways. You definitely don't want to make your sculpture out of anything man-made. You don't want to bring out any pieces of paper or trash. You definitely don't want to pick up any pieces of trash you might find on the sidewalk to use. They might have nice colors, they might have a shiny texture, but that stuff's not really very clean. And even if you're picking up natural objects like rocks or leaves or sticks, you definitely want to make sure you wash your hands in between each stage of the process. Now, before I move on to my demonstration where I actually go outside and collect some objects and build one of my own, I know that a lot of you don't have the opportunity to go outside. Maybe your parents are working all day, or maybe you just want to stay safe. You want to stay inside. Maybe you're quarantined inside of your house for a little while. We can make these found object sculptures inside your house as well. Here are some student samples that were made using the same ideas as Andy Goldsworthy. These are items that were found in a house: a broom, a stroller, a dustpan, a plunger, a light, all going all the way down to what looks like a tube of chapstick, starting at large objects and getting smaller as they go down the line. If you have some objects like this in your house, or maybe even toys of different colors that you can arrange in a shape, or if you want to get really complex, this sculpture was made by an art student who used Q-tips and laid out those Q-tips just on a kitchen or dining room table in this really complicated pattern. It's still a beautiful sculpture and a wonderful work of art, but you don't have to go outside to create something like that. The important thing to look for when you're making a found object sculpture is you just want to find some things. You want to find objects, maybe pencils or crayons or Q-tips or leaves or rocks, whatever you find that has a nice shape or a nice color, and then find a nice flat space to set them up in, arrange them however you want, and then take a photograph. When you do that, you'll be able to snap that photo, send it to me on Seesaw, and I'll be able to give you credit for that work. So hang tight. I'm going to go outside, I'm going to collect some materials and show you how to make your very own found object sculpture.
Hi scholars, so I'm outside, it's a beautiful spring day. I'm looking for some natural found objects that I can use for my Andy Goldsworthy sculptures. Now, I don't want to pick up anything man-made, any kind of trash or wrappers or toys or furniture I see laying on the side of the road. What I'm looking for are rocks, leaves, maybe flowers. Now, I want to be very careful not to pick any branches or leaves or flowers off trees. Anything that's already growing, we want to leave there. Andy Goldsworthy was an artist who found things on the ground. So if you see something like a stick or a leaf or a stone that's a natural object that you think you could add to your collection of found objects for your natural sculpture, go ahead and pick those up. Now, as I'm walking around my neighborhood, I just have a plastic bag from my local Walmart, and I'm going to put those items in the bag as I find them. Now, I did have kind of a simple idea of what I want my sculpture to look like. I'm not exactly sure because I don't know what I'm going to find yet. I might find some great sticks. I might find some flower petals or some leaves that look really nice. But I'm going to keep my eyes peeled and I'm going to keep my mind open. And then after I've collected a few dozen objects, I'm going to bring them home and I'm going to set them up. I found some pretty good looking pine cones here. I'll pick those up. I like the shape and the texture of those. 3 of them here. Well, I like the look and shape of that leaf here next to the sidewalk while I was walking. Oh, here's another little branch I found while crossing the street, right next to the sidewalk. So I'm walking down the street and I notice these trees that are in full bloom on the main street in my town here, and down on the ground I can see all of these beautiful pink petals that have been falling down from the tree. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and scoop up a couple of handfuls of just the petals. I don't want to take those rocks that are down there to help keep the tree in place, but I am going to pick up some of those colorful petals because I'd like to add those to my sculpture. Oh, I ran across all of these really wonderful, wiggly, curved sticks in my local park, so I'm going to pick up a couple of handfuls of those on my way. All right, so I'm back outside now after my walk. I have a wonderful full bag of sticks, rocks, leaves, petals that I found. Now, I do want to set this up outside. I want to build my found object sculpture out here, but I don't want to build it on the sidewalk behind my house because people might be walking through. So I'm actually going to pick this little piece of grass in between the sidewalk and the street. I definitely don't want to be in the street. I want to make sure I'm being really, really safe. If you're doing this outside, please make sure you have a grown-up with you or a responsible older sibling who can watch over you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set out my items here, all of those things that I've collected, and I'm going to start setting them out in a pattern. Now, one of the things I found was a really, really big rock. I don't know if you can see it here. And I'm going to add this big rock as kind of the center of my sculpture, and as I build out around it, I'm going to use these sticks and these pieces of bark and these leaves to build a really nice design here on the grass. Now, I don't want you guys to have to sit around and watch me do that for a long time, so I'm going to set my camera in a nice spot and I'm going to speed up the film just a little bit so that you can get a peek at my finished product. All right, so now you can see my finished sculpture. It's out of the way of the sidewalk, and I'm actually going to do the same thing Andy Goldsworthy does. I'm just going to leave this outside, and over the next couple of weeks, the wind will blow it away, or the rain. Maybe animals will take little sticks to make nests or homes, and that's really the way this was intended to be, and the reason that Andy Goldsworthy uses those natural materials. So like I said, have fun with this. Definitely wash your hands when you're done. And if you can't make it outside, try doing this with some objects you find in your house, maybe silverware, toys, stuffed animals, or even clothing. See you next time.